Afternoon, Tim. How are you today?
Very good, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm good. I know we're approaching the end of our second year, and it seems like we're just having too much fun on all of the people and process related issues. I understand that we were going to talk about, what was it, managing or planning or something with schedules today?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about time and timing and schedule management. That's the next task on the exam content outline that was coming up. One other thing, it used to be called time management. back in what was it? The 2000 version or the third edition or fourth edition, somewhere around there, they decided we don't manage time, we manage schedules. So they turned the whole terminology around. And this is what PMI does with the project management body of knowledge often. They give them new names because it's not that they're wrong, it's that they learn more about what we should be focusing on. And schedules are indeed about the time, but they're the timing of the work and not the time itself. Now, this is what's really weird. I have a good example of how this can be so different. I was managing one of my first early projects, one of the first 15 or 20 that I did, and it was in technology, and it was an update, right? I was helping a company in the local state I worked in, and we were upgrading a whole bunch of systems all at the same time. And my supervisor said, Tim, here's another project for you. It's not too critical, but I want you to go through the steps of planning and make sure everything's all right. And then come back with me. And I came back to him with a plan. He said, great. And I said, okay, I'm going to communicate with you on a regular basis. How critical is this schedule? And he says, don't worry. We can be flexible a little bit on this schedule. Lo and behold, his definition of flexible and my definition of flexible were different. I still communicated with him on a regular basis, but I didn't escalate my anxiety as to the obstacles that were coming up. And so all of a sudden, schedule management was no longer schedule management. It was all these other things that were impacting the schedule. And that was one of the greatest learnings. Early on, you say, okay, timing is important, budget's important, scope's important. But the problem is, until then, I thought that's what a project manager did. I didn't realize all these other factors could mess around with my beautiful plan.
I want to go back to something you said in terms of PMI's attention, whether it was PMP version 3 or 4, the PMBOK version 3 or 4. That surprised me when you said that, simply because when I studied project management in school, and I'm not going to tell you how many years ago that was, but we started with something called a Gantt chart. And my understanding was Gantt was around in the 50s or earlier.
Actually, much, much earlier.
Yeah.
Gantt goes way back, and we'll talk about that in future shows. But
so if we knew about schedule management back as early as Gantt, why did PMI take so long to kind of pick up on that? Or was there
because we always, not just inside of PMI, but historically we called it the management of time.
Oh, I see. I got you.
Yeah, and it's not the management of time that's of critical attention. It's the management of the schedule and the influences that everything can impact the schedule against the context of time.
Interesting. So much like your early experience, I had a similar one. It wasn't even when I was managing a project, I was managing a team. And I found out from my project manager, actually from my vice president, which was worse, that I was behind schedule. And I thought, well, no, we're not. How could I be behind schedule? We haven't finished the work. Somehow I didn't equate the fact that we had a fixed price project and we needed a completion of the task by date certain. So that was my rude awakening after spending many hours and weekends, many evenings and weekends trying to catch up again. So yeah, we all learn one way or another, don't we?
Yeah, the schedule is one of the things that we hold to, and we learn it from day one, but at the same time, we don't understand what that means when we really start understanding integration and pulling things together.
Well, in my case, yeah, this as I understood more and more and got familiar with some of the sort of automated approach to project management and scheduling, it came to a great realization that schedule was, yes, it was tasks against time, but also involved resources and involved it almost involved everything that you think about from a plan, from an overall project management plan. Risks entered the time management of the schedule, or the project management of the schedule. Issues, all these things kind of came together and all fit in terms of dealing with the timing of the work, the scheduling of the work, the integration of all the work.
I'd like to come back to risk with you a little bit later.
Sure.
But you know what? This is an important topic that you're talking about, okay? We're talking about the timing of work. And what you're telling me is the scheduling of the work and the basically laying out the durations and laying out the effort and that kind of thing. What you're saying is much more than just figuring out when the work is going to occur based on availability of things.
It does. I mean, you have to take into consideration all sorts of things. Suppose I, just as a kind of an off the topic or off the top of my head example, suppose I knew I wanted to start development in a certain month, but found out that the equipment that I had ordered for my developers couldn't be delivered until 2 months later. All of a sudden, my schedule, if I've already put it into concrete, is shot. So
Right.
you kind of have to look ahead as far as possible and develop all of these things. And that's a very simple example in terms.
And again, there are all sorts of things. Governance too. This is having one person who actually can authorize a start or end of work, and then having them go on vacation. You go through that once, and then you know, where's my backup? What's the chance of this happening on my project today? And what's the worst case scenario of not getting this sign off? These milestones are just as critical in the project as the work itself.
Well, I'll give you one that's really complex. We had a situation, actually several situations, where the system that we were building depended on trading data with several other systems. And when I say several, I mean over 100. Now, our time schedule is not the same as those 100 trading partners. So again, all of that has to be figured into the schedule, and all of those integrations with those trading partners have to be worked in so that your timeline is still met.
Yeah, that's an exponential exercise in math. It's not just a linear exercise. You're looking at a communications problem where one adds not just one.
Yeah.
So wow. Yeah, that's again, I think we're all talking about the same thing. We're just bringing up more and more examples of this fact that when you're scheduling, you're not just scheduling.
It's not just timing of work.
Right. So let's look at your background and your playground in project management. How many people and how much time does it take to actually put together a baseline, just an initial schedule? Just a baseline. How long does it take?
It can take a few weeks. Actually, so if I'm starting off a fairly large project up front, it can take over a week just to kind of get everything laid out, but not in detail, because you want your kind of gross level estimates dealt with first. You have to understand when resources become available. You have to understand when your customers' resources become available, and just kind of put all of those, and of course, the kinds of projects that I'm so used to working on have a funding requirement. In other words, funds run out at some point. So you have to understand what your drop dead date is and that sort of thing. So it probably takes a good week just to lay out the base level timeline and maybe even a basic critical path.
Right. Okay. And you're still talking rough order of magnitude. You're not talking about actual actions and steps
Right.
yet.
Yeah, not at this point. No, not, and that might take 2 or 3 people, because I may have an expert in OCM and training. I might have an expert in technical setup. I might have an expert in requirements definition. So I might need their expertise just to kind of bring that all together. So it may take 3 or 4 different people working on different segments of that plan.
Yeah, with a $30 million project, we'd have a bunch of people, and it may take multiple weeks to get from that rough order of magnitude down to the actual actions and steps. And many corporations needed that. You have the construction guys, you have the data guys, you have the server guys, you have the data center guys, and then you have the data security guys, and all of these things. And you have to get them all in a room just in order to understand what the definitive scope boundaries are, much less even getting into a rough order plan.
Well, on my last project, which was, I think, in the neighborhood of just over 300 million, we ended up going from that rough order of magnitude to something more detailed. I think we ended up with 6 or 8 full-time permanent project management people in our PMO office, in our project management office, and all they did was manage deliverable deliveries. They managed the schedule. They managed contributions to the schedule, all of that. But it took 6 to 8 people full-time for that size of project.
Oh yeah. You have a project management team, and often that team will have staff where and you have to, you have to have an attorney ready. You have to have purchasing ready. You have to have finance, even though they're on board and they bless the schedule. It's like, yeah, you have to have them on board, because there's going to be like you said, with the budget cycle, there's going to be hiccups there. And so this is an ongoing meeting that's going on in and around the project, not just getting the work done.
Well, and a lot of our customer base requires us to report actuals against plan on a weekly basis. And so they want to make sure that you are not veering. Remember the analogy we've used on this podcast several times, that a flight from Honolulu to New York probably has several thousand slight adjustments.
Course corrections, yeah.
Course corrections, yeah. And that's what we're doing on a weekly basis with those folks, because quite frankly, our customers have become very, very astute in terms of what they need out of a project management office. And so it's up to us to satisfy their curiosity and their needs.
Wow. And again, this is where you have to have almost an organizational structure, something like a PMO, whether it's temporary or permanent, to help you manage and organize, report, and validate what's going on.
And can I tell you the importance of that PMO process on the project that I'm currently serving on right now? The system integrator, who has tentacles into the world of personnel, took them several attempts to find a single project scheduler who could understand the entire size of that project. So those people are incredibly valuable. Once you get them, do not let them go. Yeah. This is the secret sauce. It's not the project manager who's smart in all things. It's the project manager who can pull that dream team together. Yes, exactly. Very good. So you have actually experienced Agile. What was it like with an Agile schedule compared to your more predictive in the past? When you say I have experienced, I felt like I was, every 10 steps I was taking, I was tripping over my own 2 feet. Because I'm so used to laying out a schedule, that say every month or every 3 months or so gets refined as you get closer to the implementation date. With Agile, in my framing, and it's because I was much more of a neophyte, to me, it was much more difficult to understand how the system integrator was developing their schedule, because it seemed to me, and I might be wrong, it seemed to me that they filled up their sprints, and if they didn't get their sprint finished, whatever didn't get done got thrown into backlog and looked at again. And to me, that just, it didn't compute, because it seemed like it could go on endlessly without a true end date. So I don't know, you've had much more experience, so am I falling off the cliff here with my
No, not at all. Not at all. That's one of the big risks of Agile. How do I maintain scope when scope is undefined? And there's a bunch of ways to do it. First of all, you don't define the scope per se. You define the purpose of the scope. You know, you don't gather requirements, you gather needs and objectives. And yeah, it sounds like I'm tap dancing, right? Basically, it's easier for people to describe a problem, the problem I'm having. Once they get emotionally engaged, you can work with your stakeholders and say, what's the problem? And they say, well, I can't get this done, or we have to combine these things, or we can't continue as an organization, or our corporation must have this done by this deadline. Does it matter how you get it done? That's a scope question. Yeah. Maybe how isn't important.
That could also be a quality question. And that's where if I'm going to be putting my name on a product, I much rather deal with a quality program that meets the client's needs than a stellar Agile process that doesn't.
Well, and let's agree what Agile scheduling mean, because there's a confusion between Agile scoping and Agile scheduling. They're totally different. Okay. So when I talk about Agile scope, a product owner comes to me and says, Tim, business has said this is what they want to do with this product for the next 2 years. And they give a big, huge visioning statement. And they say, we're going to have multiple releases. We don't know what are in the releases because technology is changing too fast. And let's go ahead and release these pieces early, and then these, and then these. And let's get feedback so we know when we're starting the second release of this product, let's call it a smartphone, right? When we release the second form of the product, we know what we need to add to it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to focus on the highest priority things that we can release early. And then within that, we're going to have these cycles of reviews of prototypes directly with the stakeholders. Now, this is called iterative with a backlog. Basically, it's the whole team is working on the most priority stuff to get it out early so we can actually get it in front of people and get them to bless the direction we're going. And as soon as we get that early direction, we can clamp down on requirements and set it going. Now, the thing is, we do this without, it's a tacit understanding. This is very humanly tacit. It's not explicitly understood, though. There's not a lot of steps that are documented for this. So the scope was the business and the product owner giving us that vision and strategy, where the scheduling was the interaction of the breakdown of the scope in early planning, iterate, early prototype, iterate. What are we getting right? What are we getting wrong? Let's move forward in the direction we need to. Now, hopefully, what you're doing is you're starting with a scope like this, and you're going like this. So as a project manager, you're constantly fighting that battle and focusing it on not the deliverable, not the functionality, but what the purpose of the deliverable is going. Does that help you?
It does. It kind of makes more sense. I was being, I'll have to admit, within myself, I was being a little jaundiced towards Agile, because I always thought that they had developed this thing called a minimum viable product as an excuse for not getting the project done on time.
Oh, that's and yeah, there's a good reason for minimum viable product. There's really a good reason. It's how can we get a prototype together that people can actually give us feedback on a small set of functionality, and then we can use that for immediate feedback. And you're not looking at the time boxes, the sprints, as defining the work. You're using the interaction of that. Now, the time boxes are important because that gives you, number one, an expectation of a duration. You don't have a set of urgency when you say, I don't know how long it's going to take, but you put a time box and say, okay, we're going to do this. Second of all, it creates an initial benchmark that you can refine. And you have to have that.
Yeah, and I can see, you used a great example, and that's of the smartphone, because I can see the smartphone, you can kind of put it out there with features, and as people use it, they can say, oh, I wish it did this. And so then you can put out more features. And so that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
For example, the whole idea of text messaging came later than, say, your ability to retrieve email. But it was a intact function that I could add to this thing.
And think about this. With your releases, maybe in year 2, some other company has a breakthrough in memory, and you say, oh, let's slide that in. And so that's part of our second release. So your second release is that phone with better memory. And then the third release is that phone with a better camera. And so as you're releasing, you're getting more and more functionality. You're creating greater and greater value.
Yeah, in my experience, see if I can explain this, how it's different than the smartphone experience. My experience tends to be where you're putting out an entire program and some pieces won't work without other pieces. And so if I'm, let's say I'm doing a eligibility system for some sort of government program. And I say, okay, I'm going to do the eligibility, but then I don't do the payment part of that eligibility system until later. It can't work, because it's fine if I find you eligible for my program, but if I can't pay benefits, then what's it? So now I have to include both of those for my release. But I can't do that unless I have the reports that go to the state legislature. So now I have to include the reporting component. It has to be released at the same time. So you can see where it becomes.
So you hit it right. You hit the nail right on the head right there. When do I not use Agile? When your relationships are really complex between your work items. When you have those well-defined relationships that are you cannot do it any other way, you're best off with a predictive schedule. And the Agile Practice Guide says this in bold and about 3 times the size of the type.
And I can see, once you're in maintenance and operations, I can see an Agile approach to improving functionality that you've already released, or adding functionality that has now become new law or new practice. So then it makes much more sense when I have my intact system that I can start improving along the way. So
yeah, and that's the thing. Agile is not just a project methodology. It's a work methodology that works really well in operations. Both Scrum and Agile are brilliant in work. Now, here's the cool thing. They work hand in hand with predictive too. You don't have to define a project as entirely Agile or entirely predictive. And you, again, you're naturally coming to that conclusion. We have a mindset that says it's black or white. No, no. In fact, there's an ongoing maturity of a methodology that says don't define your project as either agile or predictive. Just use the work and select the tools, just like you're working on a car and you hit a 1/2-inch bolt here and a 5-centimeter here. Just have both set of tools and use the work to decide what the methodology you want in front of you.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And I can tell you from one of the projects I recently completed, and it was based on Agile. One thing that had not occurred from the people developing the system was they hadn't truly come up with even a high level story pointing of the functionality. And so as they neared their last scheduled sprint, they realized their backlog was much larger than anticipated because they hadn't story pointed, they hadn't sized the functionality. And as a result, there was a delay in implementing that particular functionality. So I think it's tricky. I think it's a maturing process that makes sense, but I think it takes some wisdom in terms of applying this.
See, and it takes experience. And with experience, you gain confidence. Let's take story points. They're another scheduling tool. They're developed in scoping, but they're used in scheduling. So it basically is a story point is a unitless unit. It's a unit of measurement. It has nothing to do with duration. And it's beautiful for Agile because Agile, you say, I don't know how, I don't know how long this is going to be. Okay, let's not talk about how long. Let's talk about how difficult or how complex. And let's create a measurement unit called a story point that says 3 is real easy, 5 is sort of difficult, and 8 is we're going to go home and think about this a couple days. And you can actually say, let's weight our work items, and you can prioritize on these, you can plan around these, and you say, I don't know how long it's going to take, but we know it's going to be difficult based on this. And then with your early assessment and your early planning with your iterations, you can get in and find that ratio of duration to difficulty or duration of complexity. And it works sort of like a really neat algorithm that allows you to move to a schedule pretty quickly.
Well, and what I'm hearing you say is it's both abstract and definitive. So if you are in company A doing estimating story points, you can size your story points this way. I'm in a totally different company B, also using story points. I size them completely differently. But as long as that's the abstract part in my mind. But as long as I from sprint to sprint to sprint use exactly the same weighting to those story points, then my project and your project will proceed according to how we defined it up front.
Yeah, and especially when you get to converting your story point units from difficulty to duration. And that's just going through an iteration or two, and you figure that out. But by going through that, you can actually use that within the project. You can no way use that outside of the project context.
Yeah. So you may come up with a 100 story point estimate for your sprint. I may come up with a 300 story point estimate, and we each have 10 development resources, and we both complete on time. It's just that our story points are weighted differently.
Exactly.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense.
So this gets really interesting. This means in an agile environment, you can actually work on things with experts, even though they don't have work history where they've actually planned something in a very similar manner. As long as they know difficulty or complexity or something like that, they can pretty much jump in. Now, in a predictive project, especially these monolithic projects that you're working on, have you ever worked without that nice net called work history?
I have.
In planning?
Yeah, I have. I'm obviously much more comfortable in taking a project of similar nature from jurisdiction to jurisdiction and estimating. I get better at each jurisdiction in terms of estimating. But yeah, we've had to, my team and I, we've had to do some estimating based on little experience. And I'll tell you one, even within the same industry area, we may have gone from a total mainframe solution to, I'm going to throw out a term here that our audience may not have heard very often, but I may have gone from a mainframe solution to a client server solution, same functionality. I have to re-estimate everything for client server because it's completely different than what we've done in the mainframe approach. So yeah, each time we do something brand new, we have to estimate based on lack of historical data.
So this is what I'm interested in. How do you actually do plan and schedule without that history? You said you have one pivot, and you explained what the pivot was, which was mainframe, which is a centralized processing model, to a client server, which is a distributed processing model.
Yeah.
So how do you actually find work history? Do you just rely on the tech experts and then find the business processes and build from there the technology that can support it?
Using that example, I would rely more heavily on the technical experts, because there's probably also been a change in programming language and programming approach. The functionality may be almost exactly the same. So if I'm doing a report A on the mainframe in COBOL, and I'm doing that same report A on a client server system using a different language, what's the kind of correlation? And then can I use that and extrapolate across my entire system? So in that situation, I'm sort of using my historical data, but I'm having to extrapolate based on the different technology as an example.
Okay. I see what's going on. So you have a known, which is the work that the people do, and you have the unknown, which is the new technology infrastructure, and you're building around that. Okay.
But let me give you a different example. And that is, I decide I want to go into an entirely different niche, industrial niche, where I have little experience, but I have a good project team. So in that case, I rely on the client giving me what they believe is going to be required in terms of the functionality that's out there. Some of them are as good as saying, we need these 27 reports, we need these 14 interfaces. Some of them are that good. So then I can take their gross level qualifications and put some parameters around that and at least get a thumb in the wind kind of estimate from that perspective. Okay. In that case, I would rely on my customer to give me their parameters.
That's more of a relationship type project instead of a plan type project. And all of a sudden you're going into the domain of Agile, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
It's interesting, but then when you wrap fixed price, fixed timeline around those gross levels, then you have to put all sorts of assumptions in place. You have to prepare the customer for potential change requests. I don't like that.
Yeah,
I don't like that at all.
Yeah, it's tough. It really is tough when you have these external constraints that demand that you take not just this pristine methodology that works if you put it together exactly, and then you do it. Now, it's interesting because early in the development of Agile, a lot of corporations crashed and fell because they didn't realize the investment of people that Agile has. You can't run Agile projects, as hands off. You have to be involved, and it blew it up. And so there was a whole group of experts in Agile who got together and said, let's scale this thing. Let's have an assessment that goes into a work environment or corporation and figure out what they're ready for. And then we're going to put pieces of Agile in the project that make sense for the organization, and they can help us run with that. But at the same point, We can also be training them and upskilling them in the other pieces of Agile that they're not ready for, like with yours, setting expectations and saying, this Agile does take a top-down support. And without having that regular ongoing communication, if your environment doesn't have this Agile capability, it's gonna be an education for everybody.
Yeah, I have a colleague who made a very good living going into corporations that were beginning with Agile and not worrying about their development teams because they seem to catch on fairly quickly, but spending a lot of time training executives and executive sponsors and sponsors who are not directly necessarily involved in the project itself, but educating them as to Agile and their responsibilities in Agile and why it would look different than a normal project that they've seen before. So like I think as you were saying, it's more than just the project team. It's all up and down the organization.
Yeah, and you know what? There's another thing that's happening right as we speak, which is changing not just projects and project management, but business, and is requiring that type of conversation up and down the corporation. And a lot of people like you and me are becoming expert in this and being able to coach and train corporations and executives. Remote working. That remote working is the same way. We know how to work remotely, but we don't know how to manage remotely as corporations yet.
I was in an interview today. I was being interviewed by a outside consultant looking at lessons learned from the previous project as the corporation that I'm advising goes into its next project. And part of that interview dealt with the remote process and how we probably need to spend time educating our customer base as well as the system integrator on what it really means to manage via remote processes. It's no longer that I can have time before the meeting or after the meeting where a lot of the work gets done. It seems to be we're time boxed into these meetings and we don't have a chance to do the afterglow of a meeting or the running into you at the coffee pot meeting or that sort of thing. And so I hear what you're saying. There's a huge opportunity to have us help our customers understand how to use their remote processes.
Yeah, and there are corporations like GitHub and others that are making it work and making it work in spectacular manners. Just like Agile, though, project managers are going to have to learn how to manage remote teams because we're global now. We're not just in one state or one city. We have multiple cultures. We have multiple time zones, so you can't schedule meetings, when half the team's sleeping, no matter where that sleep is. And we talk about the work of scheduling, but we don't talk about the project management in scheduling either. And that's something we need to address as well.
Yeah. But I mean, just to kind of carry on with what you're saying, you can almost understand if I have half my development team is in Asia, you can almost understand that. But when I'm a project manager and let's say you're on my team and I need to get hold of you right now and I try to get you on one of the remote access Zoom or Teams or whatever, and you happen to, where you're living, you happen to know that there's a thunderstorm coming in and you need to cut your lawn and you take that half hour to cut your lawn just when I need to get hold of you. I mean, there's it's a whole different dynamic doing this remote stay-at-home work.
Yeah, it is hard. It is hard. And it's hard creating that culture.
Yes.
Not necessarily the laws and policies that govern remote working, but also that mindset and attitude. And it's not just putting it in the team charter. I'm exploring something right now called professional relationships. And especially on critical projects, how can I quickly create a relationship such that, as a manager, I can confirm that people are engaged just by looking at a set of data, as well as having a quick conversation with them. We should actually put this on our list and talk about remote working.
I think I'd like that because, we entitled this one something along the lines of planning and managing schedule. And right now we're talking about some of those impediments to managing a schedule well from a remote process. If you're all in the same building all at the same time, it's much easier, correct?
Right.
But if you're looking at it from this perspective, it becomes germane. It becomes almost one of the top priority factors into how you manage that schedule and manage it well.
Exactly. And managing tasks and managing people, on some projects, they're identical. And on other projects, they're totally different. And approaching a schedule is going to be totally different in both those scenarios.
I can't find it now. Otherwise, I would read an abstract from something that came across my stream this morning. And it was, even if you're working remote by permission of your company, your manager still thinks you're goofing off.
Yes.
So, I mean, at some point, we have to develop this process such that we have mutual trust and can accelerate. I mean, if I'm saving an hour a day just in commute time, how much more productive should I be? Right. I mean, so yeah, we can go on.
So let's go on and pivot over to monitoring schedules. My favorite tool is a combination of Microsoft Project and Excel. Okay. I actually dig into the back end of my database and pull data into Excel so I can play around with it because I'm really comfortable with Excel. But I do like Microsoft Project for combining some of the things I need to look at. And it gives me, like, again, a rough order of, okay, we have an issue here. This is the direction you should pursue. For you, when you get into these huge projects, what do you use for monitoring and determining appropriate changes?
So it's exactly the same. Microsoft Project. I used to use something else and it became a little more cumbersome, but Microsoft Project is so easy to lay it out. And I'm a visual person, so I like to see the Gantt laid out. And I like to see where I can do my, starts, finish to start, and all those sorts of different, and I can, where I can parallel tasks, where I can look at different work streams and see how they approach each other. But then again, a lot of my resourcing is done in Excel because it's much more able to manipulate in terms of how many staff do I need at what point. I know Microsoft Project, and I think it's gotten better, has the ability to add resources to tasks, but I'm not good enough at it. So, because I'll add a resource and suddenly my end date will shoot out 3 months and I go, what happened here? So it's one of those things where I'm like you, Project and Excel.
Yeah, and if you are going to be monitoring a budget and monitoring other things, you can do it in Microsoft Project. It works really well. We broke Microsoft Project in
so
consulting.
Have we, yes.
Yeah, and the breaking was twofold. One of the things that you were talking about, where you make a minor change and you don't realize the impact of the other changes. And so we had a rule that if we were going to use this in our reporting on our projects, we had to have a regular schedule of baselining and rebaselining so that we could always roll back to previous takes. And I even went further by doing versions of the file and using the file name for my versioning. Because oftentimes there's unintended consequences of manipulating the folder.
Well, and I think part of it too is our projects tend to be more complex in terms of how we use our human resources. And I say that best way for me to explain that is by comparison. I've also got some experience in construction of homes. When I do home construction, think about it. The people who come in and pour the fittings are not the people who come up and put up the framework. And that's a very linear approach. So I can approach that schedule linearly. Once I put up my framework, the people who come in and do the siding may be different, may be the same, but you can't do the siding until the framework is complete. So there's less overlap in that sort of thing. And Microsoft Project would handle that beautifully. But when I'm on an IT project and the person who I used in requirements definition suddenly becomes also the person who's planning the SIT test cases and there's an overlap, now I have to account for that overlap. And so it becomes more complex. So I think it's because of the lack of linearity of our tasks and our wise use of resources that it becomes more complex.
See, and this is why the project management body of knowledge talks about a schedule model and doesn't just talk about a schedule. They have a project schedule and a schedule baseline, right? And you're running those totally at the same time. And then they have a schedule calendar, which says, here's the days off, here's the days on, here's the holidays, and here's the vacations, right? So your schedule really doesn't talk about non-work time.
Yeah.
And so you have to have a calendar component. And then, like you said, some questions you have that you need answered as a project manager, you have to go back to the data. And so part of that schedule model has to be the ability to go back to the raw data and query it directly.
It does. And I was even thinking, we talked about Agile at length a few minutes ago. In an Agile project, when you're in the sprint, when you're in that whole sprint process, and your sprints are 2 weeks and then 2 weeks each, and they're going on for 10 months, that's a pretty boring schedule.
Yeah.
Sprint. I mean, so there's a lot of complexity within each of that 2 weeks that's difficult to show. Not impossible, but more difficult to show on a timeline.
Well, there's actually something called on-demand scheduling too. I didn't talk about it earlier here, but let's talk about that too. It's called flow-based scheduling in Agile. And this is when you have time boxes that are just the same, right? And you basically don't have to work as a team. Think about writing an application that has a lot of small parts, okay? And you go to the backlog and you say, okay, I'm going to grab the small part on top and run it. Maybe it's the front page of the website. And then the next person comes in and says, I'm going to grab the next piece. And maybe it's the banner. And the next piece is the contact us page, and so on and so forth. So everybody's working on a piece. And they basically grab more work when that work is done, period. So it's like cleaning up a whole cafeteria by figuring out, as soon as I've done this table, I get to move to another table, and everybody working in a collaborative manner, finish the whole thing. And that's where the project manager has to say, okay, we're not all focused on this work because we don't really have a priority, but at the same time, we need to have these roughly timed. And so the project manager's working with the team in a totally different way in that Agile model.
And the nice thing about us project managers is we're very flexible and we adapt easily to whatever we need to do, which is the heart of project management. It's the heart of scheduling. It's the heart of everything we do as IT professionals.
Well, and we're the ones who should be understanding, more the human behavior component and making sure that those things are met. Because number one, it always makes a good project team member to do that. But, if you have a good project manager, they can back up the team member. But if a project manager doesn't have this self-awareness stuff down pat and this leadership down pat, the project's going to tank.
Well, and you and I have talked about this. A lot of project managers focus on the quantitative aspects of what they're doing in terms of managing the schedule. and they forget about what you just mentioned was the qualitative aspects. And to me, the qualitative actually informs the quantitative. And so we better pay attention to that human side, that people side, so that the quantitative kind of takes care of itself.
Very good. So we have a couple more topics. I'm gonna choose one here and see how far we go with it. So when you're monitoring schedules, what type of data are you comparing against? Is it just actual to plan pretty much in your predictive world?
Yeah, that's what I do. Now, typically I have an entire project management office that helps me with this. So yeah, I'm very old school in that way, that I compare actuals against estimates and then see where we need to adjust. But some of my colleagues that help me out in this area deal with all sorts of different, the earned value is certainly one of those techniques that they use to make sure that we're producing properly. And there's something we used in my last project called, was it
SPI, Schedule
SPI,
Performance
yes.
Index?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Get that right.
Yeah, that's your velocity.
Yeah.
That's your miles per hour on your schedule. Yeah, that's a handy one. One I also found handy, especially teaching, is there's a horrible formula that nobody likes to talk about in earned value called 2 complete performance index. And it's really easy to understand. It's looking at the remaining schedule compared to the remaining time. It basically says, am I going to run out of work first, or am I going to run out of time first? And it's a ratio that you can use for quick assessment. And I use that in all my classes. And since I've done that, not only do I understand if we're going to run out of time quickly, but I can communicate it to my class. And I have smiley faces and frowny faces, and we all know what those values mean by the third day we're meeting.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not unlike in the past when I worked for a corporation, when we did our revenue recognition models for every project. We would I would instruct my team to go into their task and say, I spent this many hours against this task, but they weren't finished. They also said, and I think I have this many more to go. So that way we were doing much like you were describing, probably from a slightly different way. At the very task level, we were looking at, trying to predict exactly what it would do. And so if that started to push the schedule out, as a project manager, I would have to make decisions in terms of, do I bring on more staff? Do I look at whoever's falling behind? Do they need more training? There's all sorts of definite decisions that go into making sure that we can continue to meet that schedule.
Very good. Very good. There is time for us to talk about one more concept. You and I are in alignment. We do it the same way.
Okay.
So programs and managing programs. One of the things that I noticed that PMI is talking more and more about is that we have to understand the influence of external factors in our scheduling and keep an eye on them constantly. The enterprise environmental factors, inside and outside the company, inside, outside the project, but also these constraints type of things. And oftentimes it has to do with sharing resources between projects. And when you start doing that, you have to run those projects as a group. Do you have that experience, or are your projects big enough and critical enough that they are like too big to fail?
Some of each. When I was brought in, when my team was brought in, or when our corporation was brought in to do a project on behalf of a client, it was to do a project sort of in, complete, and out. So that from that perspective, if they had an entire program of projects to do, they would bid them out one at a time, perhaps. And so in those situations, we didn't get involved we got involved enough in the program understanding, not the management, but the understanding, so that when we developed our project, we made sure that when we left, it would fit with the other projects that were still under consideration. So from that perspective, I'm much more project-based than program-based.
Yeah, and the corporation that I was in the early part of the 2000s was really into portfolio, and that's where you're actually balancing not just the work and the schedule, but you have a shared budget across all of these different projects, and oftentimes the portfolio manager would say, okay, slow down this project because we need to move funding and resources over here and get this done. And all of a sudden, here I am as a project manager saying, I'm not doing anything wrong. Everything's running right here. And the portfolio manager would say, that's right. And we want to continue. And we'll help you too if you get in trouble. But this project over here is in trouble. So be patient and we'll get back to you. And this is just the nature of projects and project management. Even when we're working well, we have to make these changes and we have to accommodate things.
I can say that I have been the victim of, and I use that kind of attention-getting manner of program management. When I say that, I mean I've come in, my team has come in, we bid on a project, fixed price, fixed time, fixed delivery schedule, bid on it, and then relying, of course, you're always relying on your customer to say, okay, you got to fit in this way, here's the requirement, all of that sort of thing. And suddenly a main person that I am relying on from my customer side gets pulled onto another project that they have within their program. And as the minute I lose that person's ability to help me, then my schedule has a tendency to start to go awry. So, you're always having to juggle those things as well.
Wow.
On my projects, I never, we didn't share resources with other projects. They were 100% committed to this project, period. But the customers don't always see it that way from their side.
Wow. So here's the thing. And in the end, I think you and I are coming to a common point. We're saying that, scheduling, on the outset is a simple exercise in math and logical laying out of the work and the resources and the effort, right?
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's part of an integrated system that does take up a lot of our time, and we have to be available to change and adapt and to actually influence this change inside of our stakeholders, our executives, and our team constantly.
And here's the other thing that a lot of project managers don't really think of, and that is I may have to be juggling several influences on my project schedule. But what's often missed is the fact that the permutations and combinations of those juggles can add much more complexity than just dealing with them one at a time.
Yeah, it's a system. Yeah. It's an integrated system. It's not a set of swim lanes, indeed.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So this has been a really good conversation. Thanks for this today. I was really looking forward to talking about schedules with you, and it really panned out better than I expected. This is wonderful.
Well, and I got to tell you, with the introduction of project management offices, from a contracting point of view, I've probably forgotten more than I ever knew. So it's like, when you get used to people who are so good at things and just asking relevant questions. I wish I'd have had 2 or 3 of those people on today's show with me so that they could explore some of your questions more deeply. But no, I think it was a great conversation.
Yeah. So where can we find you in the next week or two if we want to get hold of you?
Well, personal conversations. LinkedIn is great. You can also visit my website, which is peoplefirstprojectmanagement.com. And just to see what we're up to these days.
Great. Same with me. I'm going to be investing a lot of time out on LinkedIn and other social media. So look for me. Thanks again. Merv.
We'll see you next week. I can't hardly wait to hear what we have to say next week.
Yes, indeed. Have a good day.
All right. We'll see you.